Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. How do you prove a murder when the body is missing and in pieces? Find out on Murder Mile. Today I'm standing on North Acton Road in Park Royal, NW10. 5 roads west of Patrick Mackay's birthplace, 4 roads south of the grey man's final victim, a short walk from the suitcase of Martha Ligman's body, and 3 streets north of the last gasp of the big teaser. Coming soon to Murder Mile. At 63 North Acton Road is Lennox Autos, a car showroom on the Powergate Business Park. On the forecourt stands a line of gleaming cars, waxed to a mirror shine, valeted so not a single speck of dust exists, and with the stickers hailing great prices and low mileage, it's mostly male customers pretend they know what they're doing by kicking tyres, tutting at the exhaust, and revving the engine to exclaim, "Yeah, that's fine," as if they're sampling a fine wine, when all they really want to know is, will it get me laid? Typical men. Just to the side sits an alley. Well, it's more of a dead end. And lined with second-hand cars, industrial units, piles of scrap metal, and a battered old shipping container, converted into a makeshift flat, which the defendant, Neculai Paizan, called home. On Sunday the 9th of May 2021, just shy of noon, his friend Agnes Akom arrived with him. She willingly walked into the shipping container and never walked out. It was a disappearance without a witness, a killing without a motive, and a murder initially without a body. Agnes could have vanished forever, never to be found. And yet what began as a missing persons case, the investigation would unravel a spider's web of deceit and lies until the killer was caught. My name is Michael. I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 335, Paizan, the Jigsaw Killer. On Wednesday the 6th of July 2022, in Court 8 of the Old Bailey, 64-year-old Neculai Paizan pleaded not guilty to murdering 20-year-old Agnes Akom, but admitted to the lesser charge of moving her body. Before the jury and Richard Marks QC, his words were translated by a Romanian interpreter. Paizan stated that Agnes sat on his bed.
She was doing something on her phone. I started to feel a bit unwell. My mouth was dry and I was not feeling right. I realised that I'd been poisoned, drugged. I believe it was the iced coffee. She drank some of it and then handed it to me and said, "You drink it, I've had enough."
Feeling a wave of darkness sweep over him and plagued by amnesia, he collapsed, and when he regained consciousness, he said,
Agnes was pushing something into my mouth, and because of the pain, instinctively I pushed her away and my 2 front teeth broke.
He would claim that Agnes had drugged him, that she had tried to kill him, that the violence he used against her was in self-defense, and that her attack on him had caused him memory loss so he couldn't recall her death. Admitting to her unlawful burial, he stated,
I realised there was no life left in her. The poor little thing. I was in such a state of panic. I didn't know what to do.
So rather than call the police because
they wouldn't have believed me, I tried to take her to the park and put her in a good place.
Agnes was dead. Paizan said he had amnesia, and with no one to independently verify what had happened inside that shipping container, the only witness to Agnes Akom's murder was the evidence itself. But how could a murder be proven? Agnes Akom, who her friends knew as Dora, was born in 2001 in Hungary. Little was reported of her early life, her family, her education, her hopes and her dreams. But with Hungary having joined the European Union in 2004, as many of her fellow countrymen and women did, in 2018, when she was just 17, she came to Britain seeking a better life. It was the last time she saw her mother, as well as almost everyone she'd ever loved or cared for. Like many, she imagined that the streets of London would be paved with golden opportunities. But as she and her partner, Peter Leonard, would learn, life in this new world would be a real struggle. As being just teenagers themselves in one of Europe's most expensive cities, it was hard to earn a good wage and impossible to pay for just the basics, especially as they were still youngsters who together had a baby son. Facing so many hardships, even though Agnes earned a living as a coffin maker, a valuable trade she'd learned in her homeland, being barely able to stay afloat, social services had taken their son into foster care. And at the time that she would disappear, Peter and Agnes were halfway through writing a letter to their son so that when he was old enough to read it, he could understand that he hadn't been abandoned. But as Peter would state,
how am I supposed to finish that letter without her?
With many friends who tried to help her, she stayed within the safety of other Eastern Europeans. One of whom she was close to was a man she'd known for just 18 months, having met him in Christmas 2020. They seemed an odd pair. Agnes was a 20-year-old woman with girlish ways, and typical of many Gen Z or Zoomers, being obsessed with social media, she posted selfies of herself living a fake version of her best life for a wealth of strangers to like. Her clothes were deliberately stylish, last seen wearing a white fake fur coat, blue ripped jeans and pink trainers. And being petite, just 5'5" and 8.5 stone with bleached platinum blonde hair, she stood out next to 64-year-old Neculai Paizan. Paizan was large, fat and bald, like Uncle Fester in the Addams Family. After decades of working in the construction trade, he was always dressed practically. He lived cheaply, being a father of 4. And although his crown of white hair and short white beard gave him a grandfatherly quality, he had the rough, calloused hands of a manual labourer and the hard scowl of someone who may have had a dark past. Yet the only crimes he was convicted of in the UK was benefit fraud, speeding and carrying a knife. One notably odd detail about Paizan's life was where he lived. As a qualified cement mixer driver who was known on almost every industrial estate in West London, he earned around £30,000 a year and owned a £700,000 former mansion flat at Camden House on Peel Street in Holland Park, a well-to-do area. But he didn't live there. Instead, he rented it out, and at least since 2008, he'd lived off-grid. Back then, his home was the Cabin, a storage facility on the Hartview Business Park, surrounded by skips, industrial units and waste disposal sites, just off the busy A406 North Circular Road and the Brent Reservoir. It's a place where no one would willingly live unless they were homeless, and yet he did. 13 years later, in 2021, he was living in a battered old shipping container on the Powergate Business Park, just next door to Lennox Autos. Surrounded by piles of scrap metal and second-hand cars, anyone passing would assume that this was a place to store tools and not a home. As made of durable weathered steel, this gloomy grey box was just 20 foot long by 8 foot wide by 8.5 foot high, but modified to live in. It had a small bed with dirty pink sheets, an oil-filled radiator for warmth, a gas-powered hob, and a sink, but with no running water, he had to use the tap at the car showroom. It was cramped, grimy. The shelves were held up by wooden joists. Bare electrics hung from the ceiling, with some secured by electrical tape. And with no window, the only fresh air was provided when the padlocked steel door was opened. So why did Paizan invite Agnes there? And why did she willingly enter? Their relationship was odd, and one that only they know the truth of. In court, Paizan claimed he met her having found her begging for change in a supermarket car park, but this cannot be proven. He said she regularly harassed him for money for drugs in return for sex, which Peter, her partner, refuted.
Paizan said she slept with 15 to 20 people a day. She did not do these things. He preyed on her vulnerabilities, and he knew it.
But having met 54 times over the last 12 months, photos taken by Paizan proved that she regularly danced semi-naked for him in a relationship that he said was intimate. He said he called her Princess, Little Angel, and Sparrow, and loving her like a daughter. She called him Grandpa. That was their secret world, which occurred within the private confines of the shipping container. Sunday the 9th of May 2021 was Agnes's last day alive. And like many, it was unremarkable. At 10:40 a.m, her partner Peter confirmed that she left their Cricklewood bedsit. She kissed him goodbye, and she said she was heading to her job as a coffin maker. Only she didn't. Across this 8-minute walk, being easy to spot in her white fake fur coat, blue jeans and pink shoes, she entered Costa Coffee at 173 Cricklewood Broadway and used her bank card to order an iced latte, the one he claimed she used to poison him. CCTV captured this at 10:48 a.m, and as she sat by the window, she waited and messaged two men. One was Attila Molnar-Ferry, her boss who the Daily Record states she was in an intimate relationship with, and she ordered an Uber to go to his home in Wembley. The other was Paizan, who she messaged between 10:18 a.m. and 10:52 a.m, and with him owing her £20, she faithfully cancelled the Uber when Paizan arrived in his silver Dacia Sandero. There they sat, chatted, and at 11:30 a.m, she left with him. They didn't argue or fight. They drove the 3.8 miles to Park Royal, and as prosecutor Jacob Hallam told the jury,
at 11:47 a.m, the defendant, Neculai Paizan, and Miss Akom got out of the car and walked around the service yard to the side of Lennox Autos.
As seen on several CCTV cameras, she was chatting, drinking her iced latte, and as Paizan unlocked the steel door to the shipping container.
They both went in and closed the door. That was 11:49 a.m, the last sighting of Agnes Akom.
Only they know what happened within, and one of them is dead. Not being home by 7 p.m, Peter grew concerned as her phone was off. She wasn't answering any texts or posts, and spending the next day calling her friends, her boss confirmed she hadn't been to work. On Tuesday the 11th of May, she was reported missing, and with CID unable to trace her, on Saturday the 16th, Agnes was elevated to a high-risk missing person under the Met Specialist Crime Command. Detective Chief Inspector Neil John, who led the investigation, stated,
"There does come a point when a decision needs to be made as to whether or not a murder investigation takes primacy. Selecting missing persons where there may be a homicide is difficult, particularly in this case, where there was no body found and no early evidence or indication of foul play.
Hundreds of people go missing in the UK every day. Most run away for personal reasons, and many are found, but very few are murdered. An appeal was made, but it drew no confirmed sightings. As DCI John stated,
We start with proof of life inquiries, social media, family, friends, bank details. In this case, there were none. We were increasingly concerned for the safety of Agnes.
As with her phone having been switched off at about noon on the day she vanished.
This was completely out of character for her.
But a tiny clue shined through. The last transaction she made was at Costa Coffee at 10:48 a.m. CCTV showed her getting into a silver Dacia Sandero, and using ANPR and traffic cameras, they tracked it to an address it was registered at. An old battered shipping container beside Lennox Autos on the Powergate Business Estate in Park Royal. Tuesday the 18th of May 2021, 9 days after her disappearance, officers arrived at the shipping container. It was a start, an introduction to Neculai Paizan, Agnes's friend who was possibly the last person to see her alive, and with nothing suspicious in his past, detectives were only there to question him. They knocked on the steel door, but he wasn't there, and neither was his car. With heavy-duty padlocks securing it, the fire brigade forcibly gained entry. Inside was nothing. No Agnes, no Paizan, no body, no obvious blood, and none of her clothes. It was a mess, but there was no hint that she'd even been there. With this still a serious missing persons case and not a murder investigation, fortuitously for the police, seeing the fire trucks surrounding the shipping container and believing it was on fire, Paizan arrived. That day, yet to be a suspect, he was questioned at Wembley Police Station, aided by a Romanian interpreter. He claimed she went with him to the container for sex. They stayed for a short while. He then dropped her off at a cash machine at the Asda in Park Royal, and that he hadn't seen or heard from her since. But as Detective Constable Mike Davidson said,
he gave an account, but we knew it was untruthful.
And worse still, he kept referring to her in the past tense, even though no one had even suggested that she was dead. While he was interviewed over the next 3 days, detectives corroborated his account with the facts. Several CCTV cameras confirmed that on Sunday the 9th of May 2021 at 11:47 a.m, Paizan and Agnes entered the shipping container. Watching every angle of the footage, 24 hours a day, across the 9 days until the detectives had gained entry, they confirmed that Agnes went in, but never came out. So where was she? His alibi in court was that she'd poisoned him with an iced latte, but CCTV showed no signs of him collapsing, staggering, or looking drugged. He was asked about this discrepancy, but he had no reply. At 12:22 p.m, 35 minutes later, cameras showed Paizan, and only Paizan, leaving the shipping container alone. He was holding his left arm awkwardly. On his forearm were several red marks which detectives believed to be her blood, and at the showroom's tap, he washed his hands and his face. D.I. Johns recalled,
"There's a chilling image of him looking up at the camera that will remain with me forever."
When questioned further, Paizan replied,
"Maybe she's still alive."
But by then, as the detectives told him,
she's not alive.
As even without a body, the evidence against him was mounting up. DCI Johns recalled,
"We took the container apart. The floors came up. The walls came out. The ceiling came down.
The inside was filthy. Yet forensics confirmed that with the bed stained with bleach,
Vigorous attempts had been made to clean it up.
And with faint traces of blood proven to be Agnes's, with her having been attacked violently, a single speck of blood was found on the spine of a Bible on Paizan's shelves. She had died there. They knew it. But how did she die and why? Changing his story, Paizan, who when interviewed had both forearms in plaster of Paris casts, claimed that having washed his hands and his face and suffering an attack of amnesia, he returned to find Agnes dead.
"Curled up in a ball. I got scared."
In his second alibi, he would claim that either her injuries were self-inflicted, or that someone had attacked her when his back was turned, unseen by any camera. Knowing the police wouldn't believe this fanciful tale about a mystery man who could walk through steel walls, he didn't call an ambulance. Instead,
"I tried to take her to the park and put her in a good place."
And and although he said he loved her
like a daughter,
his actions were proven to be selfish and callous. At just after 3:30 p.m, he dragged several items out of the container and, reversing his car up to the door, he loaded them into the boot. Her white fur coat, her blue jeans and her pink trainers. Anything which could identify her and save her loved ones from the pain and grief of never knowing where she was. Cameras also spotted him loading into the boot a rolled-up carpet and a heavy object in a stained pillowcase. So why did no one see this as suspicious? It's an industrial estate. He was one of hundreds of men that day wearing orange high-vis overalls and loading bulky items into a car. And being known at every waste disposal site in West London, no one batted an eye when he dumped them into several skips. An hour prior, he had dragged a large white builder's merchant's bag, likely containing her body, to a unit he had rented just next door. The space was empty. Only he had access to it. And on a sheet of plastic, he cut up her body into pieces using an electrical saw, severing both legs, arms, the torso, and her head. Anywhere else it would have drawn attention. But with every unit on the estate filled with the sound of hammers and angle grinders, the dismembering of a body was passed off as something innocent. At around 5:30 p.m, unmanned cameras caught Paizan dragging the body from the unit, loading it into his car, and again nobody noticed, as why would they? And even as he dispersed every piece of proof in the killing of Agnes Akom into several skips across the city, it just looked like he was renovating a house. And as he parked his car up outside of his flat on Peel Street, nobody knew that inside lay a dead body. Paizan had committed an unseen murder and disposed of the body in plain sight. But as we know, one witness was always watching: the cameras. DCI John recalled,
there was one part in the timeline where we had no sighting of Paizan's car.
So slowly and methodically,
the suspect's car was tracked across northwest London by officers moving from road to road and watching each junction.
It took weeks of trawling through these grainy images with many blind spots, but eventually traffic cameras spotted him entering a familiar industrial estate. At about 8 a.m. on Monday the 10th of May 2021, the day after the murder, Paizan's car pulled into the Harpview Business Park, just off the A406 North Circular Road, and a few doors down from the cabin, the old storage facility at the back of Neasden Rec Ground, where he'd lived just a decade before. As before, he had bagged up in a black plastic bag and callously tossed Agnes's fake white fur coat into the skip. No one would have known it was key to a murder investigation. As to the casual observer, it was just junk. Next, he dumped something heavy, and although it was wrapped in a blood-stained pillowcase, no one suspected it was blood, as everything in this skip was either spattered with red paint or creosote. And even if they had opened it up and spotted the bloodied electric saw inside, as he had tried and failed to wash it, it took forensic specialists to identify the blood and hair attached to the blade as Agnes's. Police had found bloodstains in the shipping container, his car and his unit, with proof of him disposing of her clothes, lying to the police, and the electric jigsaw he'd used to dismember her body. With so many inconsistencies in his statement, on the 24th of May 2021 at Wembley Police Station, just 6 days after he was first questioned, Paizan was arrested on suspicion of false imprisonment and murder. Detectives could prove that Agnes had come to serious harm at the hands of Paizan, yet without a body, as he shifted his alibi from finding her dead to self-defense, to having been poisoned and attacked by a woman who was half his size. The gap in the evidence could mean that he may get away with a lesser charge of manslaughter. and yet it was a faint and distant image on an unmanned camera, which provided a hint of a clue. At just after 8 a.m, wearing his nondescript orange high-vis overalls, Paizan was spotted exiting the Hartview Business Park and carrying a spade. At 9:13 a.m, the same camera caught him pushing a big blue wheelie bin in the same direction. And clearly being heavy, he struggled to lift it up a curb. Heading right, there was nothing but a long stretch of the A406, the Brent Reservoir, and the Neasden Recreational Ground. Teams of specialists swarmed the waste transfer site, sifting 60 tons of rubbish. Divers plumbed the depths of the reservoir, and ground-penetrating radar examined every patch of grass, but nothing was found. Until Monday the 14th of June, 36 days after she disappeared, when a cadaver dog caught a scent. At the northeastern end of Neasden Rec, near the jagged fence which borders the industrial estate, the severely decomposed body of Agnes Akom was found. Buried in a shallow grave and covered by logs and branches, she was lying in a fetal position, a cord around her neck and her decapitated head wrapped in a black plastic bag. DNA proved it was her, and for DCI John, her discovery proved to be poignant.
Each day, I would drive her to work along the North Circular Road, thinking about where she could be. Her resting place was less than 100 metres from where I was driving, twice a day, every day.
In court, Judge Richard Marks QC stated,
"What truly happened there, and why you did what you did, is something that only we can surmise. Tragically, she never lived to tell the tale, so the court and the jury only had your account, which I am certain was demonstrably untrue and which the jury rejected."
That morning, Agnes had willingly walked into Paizan's shipping container, a place she'd been to many times before, possibly to receive a £20 note that he owed her. The judge continued,
"For reasons only known to yourself, you launched into a vicious attack, hitting her over the head at least 20 times with an electric jigsaw."
It was a sustained attack on a vulnerable lone woman which came out of nowhere. The pathologist said,
"She had no defensive wounds, and having caught her unaware, she was rendered incapable of even raising her arms in an attempt to defend herself,"
as he bludgeoned her again and again. But why? Nothing caught on any of the cameras caught a hint of the brutal violence which he would unleash. Agnes was the girl he said he loved like a daughter, and he was the man she called Grandpa. But when he finally stopped lying about her poisoning him with a drug latte, he admitted,
"She said, 'Don't touch me.' She didn't feel like it. She wasn't in the mood. She told me to leave her alone."
And as a man who had preyed on her vulnerabilities to abuse her, her sexual rejection would lead him to murder her. But there was no remorse in this man, and no regret for the life he had ended for entirely selfish reasons. As DCI John recalled,
"The level of violence Paizan used in his attack on Agnes is truly horrific. What she suffered inside the container does not bear thinking about, and his attempts to hide his crime show a calculated effort to ensure that not only Agnes was never found, but that he would never be caught."
Especially as, in the days after the murder, Paizan visited Neasden Rec 5 times. On the 19th of July 2022, in Court 8 of the Old Bailey, the jury retired to deliberate. Having admitted to moving the body, but denying murdering her, Paizan rejected his initial alibis, and in an attempt to paint Agnes in a bad light, he falsely claimed that she was a sex worker, which prosecutor Jake Hallam QC stated was a pack of lies. Having deliberated the evidence in this complicated case, the jury then returned after just 1 hour. Found guilty of all charges, 64-year-old Neculai Paizan was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years. And given his age and alleged ill health, it's unlikely he will ever see freedom again. Outside court, DCI Neil John said,
"What we know about Agnes tells us that while she was vulnerable, he has clearly lied about her background and personal situation in an attempt to sway the jury."
In her own statement, Agnes's mother said,
"He literally dragged her through the mud in life, and her name through the mud after her death. He presented himself as the victim, but he is the one who was the liar."
And with her partner Peter traumatized, stating,
"She was my love, the mother of my son, my partner and my best friend, and he took her away from me in the worst possible way."
There was of course one more victim in this tragedy. Her baby son, who while currently in foster care, will one day have to learn about how his mother died. After Paizan's arrest, Agnes was cremated and her ashes were flown back to Hungary. Not that Paizan cared. After his conviction, he appealed. He stated that the sentence was excessive, that the judge had failed to consider his age and his health, that Agnes's prior convictions were not taken into account, and he even complained that one of the jurors smelled of cannabis. But it was clear that he was a liar, as it was also proven that he didn't need a Romanian interpreter, and with this just a tactic to delay the investigation, his appeal was rejected. As of today, Paizan remains behind bars, and so far, he's been beaten up 3 times. Some might say this is justice for the Jigsaw killer.